All right, good morning, everybody. So today we'll be talking about substance, and especially substance for creating materials and texture assets in the case of automotive assets. So interiors of cars, exteriors, and pretty much everything that has to do with visualization of inside of an automotive workflow. So I'm Jeremie Noguer. I'm Director of Strategy for Entertainment at Allegorithmic. And I've been working on substance designer and then substance painter pretty heavily in the last few years. So as I said, substance right now is the industry standard for material creation and texturing. We started in games, and more we're gravitating towards other markets such as automotive, design, architecture, and pretty much anybody who at some point needs some kind of digital material or digital material library. So I'm just going to run a small video showing stuff that people have been doing with substance, and then we'll go on with the presentation. All right, so as you can see, a lot of the very different things, from games to interior architecture design, shoe design, you saw a bunch, visual effects, movies animation. Substance can really create materials for all sorts of fields. But today we're going to talk more about automotive. And the funny thing is that we started with games, and our DNA is really into game in the first place. And one of the games that started using substance very early was the Forza series from Microsoft. And typically, the way they want to visualize the car is actually very close to what you see today when car companies and car makers try to visualize the cars in VR, for example, for either during the design process or for the sales process. And those workflows are actually kind of colliding and very close to each other. So Forza was a game that was using substance early on. And we're seeing more and more companies that either do a VR experience or just commercials using substance as well to create assets for texture assets for automotive. So here, Zero Light here, this example as well was very interesting of really detailed interior of a car through VR. So our client list today is, again, there's a lot of different clients. Some are use Substance a lot. Some use it in very specific ways. What we see usually in the automotive industry is we have a few key people that will already leverage the Substance tools and create libraries of materials for other people to be able to just experiment and play around with those material libraries. So I've been talking a lot about material creation and textures. So what is material creation and texturing? So on this slide, you can see that we start from a mesh that could be coming from CAD data from a manufacturer, or that could be something that's been derived from CAD data and brought into something that's more real-time friendly, I guess, with less geometry. Less geometry. But what you want to do is transform that pretty much empty shell into something that will actually look like a car. And that's where you'll need to apply different kind of materials that are sometimes very complex, like a car paint, that doesn't have a lot of different layers, because that's just how these materials are built in real life. Or stuff that is more simple, like rubber for tires or leathers or fabrics. So what is Substance, and why is it different from just, I would say, your regular old school bitmap textures? One of the first element is that a Substance is a procedural asset. And that procedural assets mean that it can be randomized, customized, modified at any point in time. So instead of just having, let's say if you scan a surface, you scan just a piece of fabric or leather, you can have something that's very static and it's very hard to modify. When you build a Substance, you actually end up with material that can be modified pretty much endlessly, and you can create tons and tons of variation of that material without having to go back into an AutoTech tool. You basically can play around with sliders with very simple user interface to modify the look of these materials. So a few examples here, if it will work. There you go. A few examples here inside of Substance Painter. So I'll show you a little bit of Substance Painter afterwards and how it links with Unity. But in this case, it's just interior of a car that we've set up internally at Allegorithmic. And so we've applied different materials. And the materials you see here are actually coming from we call Substance Source, which is our online database of material. And you'll see later in the slides that we've refocused a big part of this year to building materials for the automotive industry. So here you can see the process of modifying those materials through different sliders and tweaks, where you can really change the expected material very deeply, change the patterns, the colors, and everything to really create variations very, very fast and iterate very fast. So what a Substance toolset is today is we have a piece that's software and content. On the software side, we have currently 3 tools. Actually, a 4th one is coming up probably next week or in 2 weeks from now in beta. So what we have is Substance Designer, Substance Painter, and Substance Bitmap Material. I'll go in detail about these tools just after. And then on the content side, we have Substance Source, which, as I say, is our material library content. So Substance Designer first. So Substance Designer is really the tool that allows you to create materials entirely from scratch or from scanned data. And as you can see the screenshot here, it's a fairly complex tool, and usually it's really dedicated to technical artists, technical people, but they'll already be able to go very, very deep in how they want to build those materials and the definition of those materials. So as Substance Designer, you have access to a real-time viewport that allows you to see how a material would react in real-time conditions. So if you're targeting VR, for example. But you also have the renderer NVIDIA iRay embedded in there. So if you're targeting more an offline renderer and very like beauty renders of your car, you can also see how those complex materials will react to lights in that kind of offline conditions. Actually, sorry. The fact that we support iRay in Substance Designer also means that we support MDL, which is the NVIDIA material definition language, which is kind of a standard for transporting material information from one point to another, and especially when you're dealing with very complex materials such as car paint, for example, you cannot just transport textures. You actually need to transport a shader that has multiple layers, the same way that in real life your car paint will have multiple layers. That materials need to react the same, and MDL allows you to visualize these very complex layers inside of Substance, but also inside of other renderers once you export that from Substance Designer. Then we have Substance Painter, and Substance Painter is much more traditional in a way that it's not node-based like Substance Designer. It's actually layer-based, so in its usage, it's very close to using Photoshop or any other painting tool in the market. And what you can do in Substance Painter is bring in an object or a scene, and you can apply materials on the different parts of this object, apply materials, paint specific decals, for example, and really view a high-quality render in real time, and again, in iRay if you want to, of your car, either interior or exterior. Then we have Substance Bitmap to Material, and actually, I'm talking about Bitmap to Material here, but it'll actually be replaced very soon by another tool. So Bitmap to Material is an extremely simple way to grab a photograph, a single photograph or a single image, and generate the material out of it. So we'll just, you can just take a picture of a piece of fabric, a piece of leather, piece of metal, anything you want, and bring it into Bitmap to Material. It will automatically generate for you all the textures you need to actually create a material. So it will generate a bump map, normal map, a roughness, metalness, any map that are used today by modern renderers and modern engines. So again, it's a very straightforward tool. We're actually working right now, it's not in my slides, but we're working right now on something called Substance Alchemist, which is kind of an advanced, the next-gen version of Bitmap to Material. And it's a new tool that allows you to very easily bring in images, bring in scan, and merge all that together, layer those materials to create much more complex materials, and then export that to Unity, Painter, pretty much any app that needs those materials. And finally, as I said, we have the content side, and on the content side, we have Substance Source. And so Substance Source is an online library. You can just access it on source.allegorithmic.com, and there is now, I think, this is an old screenshot, but I think now we have about 2,000 materials. And we have a pretty big library of materials dedicated to automotive. We have a whole team working on this and creating material drops, that we call them, that basically every few months we'll get together and see, okay, we're going to try to address a specific industry or a specific group of people. And we've done it with architecture, we've done it with game, we've done it with apparel, with a lot of fabrics, with shoe designers, and recently with automakers. So again, all these materials you see here are all procedurally created in Substance Designer. So that means that from one of these materials, you actually get an infinity of variations based on the same principle. So again, if you go on Substance Designer, that's where we create all those materials. And I just have a few more examples here of, and this time these are iRay renders. So before we had the kind of the real-time view in Substance Painter. These are iRay renders of that same car door with several materials coming from Substance Source. And you can see different variations that we can get in the materials depending on the result we want. And it's very easy. I'll show you in Substance Painter afterwards. It's really easy to, from the tool, go directly to Substance Source, grab a few materials, try it out, and tweak the parameters. And you can really iterate pretty fast and create tons and tons of variation of the same asset by just applying different materials and tweaking those materials until you get the look you want. And these are some interesting variations of different fabrics, different plastics, different metals. So Substance Designer, as I said, allows you to create materials that are procedural, but it also allows you to create materials based on scan data. And we built a whole set of nodes and set of tools to go from very simple scan data that can actually, we have templates online that allow you to create your own scanning device with very, very cheap components, and you don't need to buy a very expensive specialized piece of equipment. And from these, from the output of this kind of DIY version, we can create very, very high quality scan from Substance Designer. So typically you start with a physical material. You have a sample of leather or fabric or any kind of material you want to scan. And so you do that scanning. The middle image here is kind of a very simple explanation of how it works. You just place your sample on a surface, and you'll just place your camera, phone. It really doesn't, you don't really need to use like a very high-end camera. It actually works pretty well with just a simple iPhone. And you just place your phone or camera on top, and you'll just take 4 or 8 pictures with a light that just goes around that surface. And that will give you 8 pictures of the same surface, the same sample, with just different lighting. And from this, inside of Substance Designer, that's the graph you see on the right here, we can take all this input that you see on the left part of the graph, and we're going to process them in several nodes to get rid of the lighting, generates a very precise normal map, make sure that the material is seamless, and remove the effects that may be on the material. If you have like some dust or some speckles or some hair that were on the surface, we can also get rid of that. And you can end up with a material that will be extremely high quality. And actually, even for these ones, just a phone will work for creating these materials. You don't need any kind of fancy device. And again, variations, you can easily, by processing that through Substance Designer, we can easily just create tons of variations in the type of weaving of the fabric, type of color, and different things. So here are a few examples of what we can do in Substance Designer. Some of it being entirely procedural. The top one is entirely procedural. So the graph you see here is basically taking a bunch of procedural shapes and noises, and we're mixing them together to create some interesting pattern. In this case, it was for a speaker mesh. The second one is scan-based. So you can kind of see, again, at the beginning of the graph on the left side, in that round pattern, these are all the different photos that we took of that kind of metal sheets. The cool thing about this method is that it's working on everything. It will work on metals, it will work on fabrics, pretty much any kind of material. And then we process it to get to a material that's seamless and that we can use anywhere from Substance Painter to Unity. And then the third part is an interesting one. It's hybrid materials. In this case, we have a leather scan, and you can see kind of the leather scan is that green node that you see at the top of the graph. And that leather scan is really just the grain of the leather that we scan, because leather is one of these materials that's extremely hard to create procedurally or artificially, because there is very, very intricate structure in leathers that you need to keep to get the right look. And so you want to scan that, but on top of that, what we want to do is have all sorts of cool use for that leather. In this case, the pattern itself, the weaving you see and the different kind of shapes are actually made procedurally, and we can use that scan surface with some procedural details added on top of it, and of course all that can be tweakable, so we can tweak the amount of like the pattern of the weaving and everything. So again, it just makes a scan material dynamic instead of being just a static thing that you can't really do anything with. So again, coming back to Substance Source and the materials that we added recently, as I said, we tend to try to do drops that are very specific to an industry, so we can really concentrate the team. We have a team of about 3-4 artists working full-time, just creating materials, and we try to focus them on a very specific topic at a time. And so we had game and visual effects assets, fashion design assets. We partnered with some fabric manufacturers to really get the scans right and apply some patterns and some colors on top of that. And then we have, more recently, the automotive assets. We also did some architecture selections, materials, and you can see some examples here of different materials that we added to substance source. Again, all these materials, some of them are scan-based, but even if it's scan-based, we add as much control as we can so that you can create very cool variations from them. And so coming back to the automotive drop, we have about 500 materials ranging from, again, car paint to leathers, fabrics, interior, exteriors, headlights. There's tons of different things. And for each of these materials, we have presets. So inside of a substance, it's tweakable. And we can embed presets so that rather than just tweaking the sliders and trying to find the right look, we give you already a bunch of presets that you can use to get there faster. And all these materials scale up to 8K, so you can really get very high details from these materials. So these are kind of a sample of the materials we have. Actually, if you go on Substance Source, you'll be able to see all these materials, and you can actually preview them in 3D as well. So you can actually click on the material and bring up a 3D preview so you can really see how the material reacts to the light and how it would work in real time. So you can see a few samples here, rims, car paints, tires, leathers, a lot of carbon fibers, a lot of different variations of carbon, and of course presets for all these materials. So every time we have a material, you can actually, again, tweak that material to fit the look you want. So typically, these are two different presets for one material. This is another material where you can really change the patterns and the roughness and all the different aspects of the material. We have some very specific material also, for example, LED strips. And it goes pretty far in how you can customize this. The artist went pretty far on to make sure that the material you get is exactly what you're looking for. These are also interesting. These are tires and full wheels. And so the tire is a material, and the brake pad in the back is a material. And actually, the rim itself is a material. So if we look at the actual geometry of this asset, this is pretty much what it looks like without any texture. And the interesting part is that all the geometry you see is actually just displacement. And so in that case, it's really cool to be able to try different rim patterns, because you don't have to, if you have to model in 3D each rim that you want to try, it's going to take you weeks or months. In this case, you can just load a substance that has a very cool displacement map in it, and you can really see the geometry and tweak just basically the texture to create all sorts of different variations. And again, those textures go up to 8K, so you can really get the very fine detail, even if you zoom in on those textures. All right, I'm going to switch to a little demo of Substance Painter in Unity, and then I'll come back to a few slides. So, switch now. All right, there we go. So in this case, I brought the seats from Faurecia into Unity, and right now it's basically just an empty mesh again, and it needs materials and it needs textures. And to apply this material and apply it to textures, we can use Substance Painter. So what I'll do is I installed the Substance plugin for Unity. So if you go on the asset store, you'll find the Substance plugin, and it has multiple components. First, it allows you to load Substance files from Substance Source or that were created with Substance Designer, and the Substance file will actually be able to tweak them. And let's see if I can actually log in on here. You can actually access Substance Source directly from Unity, and you'll be able to download assets and play with these assets very easily. Then the second part, as I said, is that you can load these Substance files that you created yourself, that are custom, that you created in Substance Designer. And the third part is that you can leverage a live link with Substance Painter. It allows you to, from Unity, being able to take that asset directly into Substance Painter, start texturing it, and see in Unity in real time what your texturing looks like in context in the scene that you've built in Unity. So what I'll do is I'll just go on my asset here, and I'm just going to right-click. Oh, let's see what's going on. Oh, that's the slides here. I'll try to clone my display. All right, I just need to clone it. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so let's go back a little bit. So as I said, the Substance plugin allows you to load substances and also be able to access substance source directly from Unity. So you'll be able to browse all the materials that we have on substance source from Unity and just download them directly in your project. And so the third part of this plugin is that you can leverage the live link, as I said. So here I have the seat, car seat, and I just want to create the material for it. So I'm just going to right-click on my seat here, and I'm just going to say send to Substance Painter. And what we'll do is it will create a project with my seat in Substance Painter automatically. So we just imported the seat inside of Substance Painter, and I can now start working on my asset here. So let me go here, making sure I have the right setup. All right. And so in Substance Painter, I'll be able to just drag and drop materials and apply stuff very, very fast. So if I want to, for example, find a fabric, these are just the default materials we have in the Substance Painter shelf. Obviously, you can use Substance source to download any material and add it to your shelf very easily. So let's go for, I have a vintage fabric here. So if I apply that fabric on the mesh, you'll see it applied on the whole mesh pretty much. And then I can kind of scale that fabric up and down, and I can change the resolution and get something a little more high resolution. So here, my material, basically the textures that I'm generating are in 1024. In Substance Painter, since it uses in the background a procedural approach, I can change that resolution at any time. So it allows me to scale very easily to those textures. So if here I have a fabric that I don't really like the resolution, it's a little too low, I can go in and set it to 2048, and my materials are regenerated at a higher resolution. And in Substance Painter, I can go up to 4K, and I can actually export up to 8K. So again, you can get very, very detailed materials out of Substance Painter. All right, so I want this material to be only on one part of my object, though. So what I want to do is again, if you used Photoshop before or any painting tool, you have layers, and on each of these layers you can add masks to make sure that the content of this layer only applies to one part of your document. It works exactly the same way in Substance Painter. So I have my material here, and I can just right-click and add a black mask. So by default, it's black, so my material is applied nowhere, pretty much. And I can paint on this mask to define where my material is going to be applied. So I could just paint manually where I want that material to be. But what I can also do is use the geometry I have to just select which sub-object and which part of my object will get that material. So I can go in and select the selection tool. And you can see the wireframe is pretty high here. We have several million polygons. You can load very heavy geometry in Substance Painter, and the painting and everything will remain pretty smooth. Especially here, I'm just on a laptop. If you're working workstation, it's going to be super fast. So on the selection tool, I have different options. I can select per polygon and just do like a drag selection. But I can also select through mesh or UV chunks. So in this case, if I choose UV, I can actually choose which part of my UV map are actually going to be getting these materials. Let me just tone down the wireframe a little bit, because that's a little crazy. There we go. And I can say, all right, I want this material maybe only on this part, and maybe also on the headrest. And so I have my material applied here. And I can just apply this process multiple times. The cool thing is that I've been working here, and if I go back to Unity, my sit is, let's see. may actually have two seats on top of each other here. There we go. My seat is actually updating in Unity. And here I only have one screen, but if I had two screens, I could actually paint inside of the Substance Painter, wait a second, and then see the results in Unity. And the shaders in Substance Painter and in Unity are very, very similar. So what you'll see in Substance Painter is pretty much what you get in Unity as well. All right, so I have my fabric. I'm just going to add a second material. So maybe I want a, let's see, I'm going to go for a metal. And here by default in the shelf, we got a bunch of what we call finishes, which are metals with a specific finish from brush metal to grinded, grainy. We have powdered metal, and yeah, all sorts of cool metals. You can apply them on the mesh, and then you can change which type of metal you're actually applying. So in this case, you're going to keep the grain, but the metal is going to be a little different. So in this case, I'm going to go for, let's go for galvanized. Let me make sure this will work. Not the galvanized, probably the grind one. So again, I can just drag and drop a material on the mesh. And by default, it will apply the material on the whole mesh because I don't have any mask. So I can do the exact same thing I did. I'll just create a black mask and then select which part of my object I want the metal in. That would be kind of the structure on the here, and maybe the back of the seat. I want that be metal. So that works pretty well. And maybe I want to add some kind of custom fabric or leather on here. So what I can do is actually bring in Substance Source, again from Substance Painter. And I'm just going to log in here. And then I can go in and kind of look for different things. So if I look for fabric, for example, I'm going to have a lot of them. I think we have, on the fabric side, yeah, we have about almost 400 fabrics. And so, again, each of the fabric, some of them have patterns, but most of the time those patterns are procedural, so we'll be able to modify them afterwards. So let's see what I have here. For the car, this could actually look pretty good. So what I can do is I can go and look at what the material looks like in here, and just download it if I just want to work with it. So let's go with, maybe we'll go this one. All right, so now I'm downloading the assets, and that asset is going to be put in my Substance Painter shelf. So this one I believe is based on the scan data, so it may take a little bit to download because the scan data is basically embedded inside of the substance. A substance file that's entirely procedural is going to weigh pretty much nothing, a few kilobytes, just because it's just procedural data that's generated when you need it. The scan materials, you actually have to embed the original scan data inside of the substance. All right, so I have my substance here. Again, I can just drag and drop it on my mesh, and I'm just going to kind of tighten it a little bit because this is pretty strong. It's actually, if you zoom in, if I don't tighten it too much, you'll see that we can really see all the details from the fiber in here. But in my case, I really just want to tighten it a lot more. So I'm just going to tighten it here, and I can go and see what the parameters are. And I can see that this fabric is actually made of 3 different kind of threads. And so I have a color for each type of thread. So if I bring it back to, let's bring it back to 4 so we can really see what we're doing. So we can see we have 3 different types of thread that are kind of intertwined together. And I can really go in and change each thread independently. So I can change the blue thread maybe to something a little gray. And this one is actually, yeah, that's this one. Go something like this. Maybe a dark blue, and then the last one over here. I'm going to switch to some darker one over there. All right, and then you can choose for each thread. You can choose like the roughness of the thread, if it's shiny or not. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. You can switch. You can change how much variation you get in the threads if you don't want something entirely uniform. And each of these fabric materials has tons and tons of settings you can play with. All right, so now if I want this material this color. I'm just going to tidy it again so we get the right scale, and do the same thing that I did before. I'm just going to create a black mask and select which part of my seat I'm actually going to be using this. So that would be probably this part and this part, and yeah, that's pretty good. I'll go with this. All right, I want to add a last material on there. I'm just going to add leather, so we have a few kind of more shiny parts. So you're going to go in leather, and we have a lot of different leathers, from perforated leathers to kind of like the fake leather you'll find in cars with like plastic that look like leathers. And in this case, I may just want a, let me see. This one actually pretty good. Yeah, so we'll go and use this one. So again, I'll just download it. I think this one is also based on a scan. As I said, the leathers are extremely hard to create procedurally. So we tend to do the scanning, and we do the scanning ourselves, but again, we use the same DIY scanning device that you can build pretty easily by just following instructions on our website. All right, it's downloaded now, so I can just go in and I'll just apply this on the last part of my mesh. So again, this one has a few settings I can play with, maybe a little shiny, so I can just adjust the roughness a little bit here, and then I could change the variation. I'm going to go for something a little leather, it's a little darker. There we go. And again, I actually don't have to do a mask here. What I'll do is I'll just put that as the background, so we'll just fill up whatever parts of my asset I wasn't using. So let me switch up the normal map. All right, there we go. And so now I'm going to go and get the hider on, and you know what? It's actually going to be easier if I put it on the top and create a mask. Just because the normal map is coming through, and I would have to set up my different layers so that it wouldn't come through. It'll just be easier to do it this way for now. All right, there we go. I have my material. I'm just going to title it again to get the right scale. Not too much, just a little bit. There we go. And then it's a little too shiny, so again, I'm just going to increase the roughness a little bit and get something a little more like a black leather. All right, then, so I got my seat. If I go back to Unity, I should have my leathers appearing. Not sure what there's some issues here in my project, so it's taking a little longer than it should. But it should really almost be real time when you update things. Yeah, it's updating a little too much. There we go, and I have my leather, my fabric, my seat, and I'm pretty much done. So actually in Substance Painter, as you can see, the default kind of viewport preview doesn't look as good as Unity, just because there's a lot of settings that I didn't activate just for the sake of working on the assets. But typically you can have shadows and different things to make sure that your asset look how it should look. And our shadows are actually pretty advanced, and sorry, allow you to get some very interesting shadowing. As well, you can change the environment map. So if you want to see what the asset is going to look like in an environment map that looks like what you're using when you're doing your car visualization, you can actually load any kind of environment map you would have created yourself or you found online, and you can use that to light your object. You can just rotate it, and I can also, of course, use iRay to render this asset. So I can switch at any time with the little camera icon over here. I can switch to iRay. It's just going to warm up for a little bit. And you can really see what this asset would look like in a offline rendering context. So it may just take a little bit to warm up because the geometry is pretty heavy. Once you launch iRay once, and then you come back to real time and go back to iRay, that warm up doesn't happen. So it's really just the first time you actually load the asset. it should. In the meantime, I can actually, you can see here, the little icon on the side has a little green dot, and that's our LiveLink plugin icon. And so that means that LiveLink is currently active with Unity. And you can deactivate it at any point. So if you just want to work on your asset and you don't care about having kind of the overhead of sending stuff to Unity, you can just pause it and just keep working, and then just turn it back on as soon as you want to go back to Unity. I don't know why this is not working. Still warming up. Just make sure that oh well, I guess we'll leave Ira by himself, and that's fine. I'll just go back to real time and to my slides. We're actually almost out of time, so let me go back to the slides here. And yeah, so expect more to come. That first automotive material drop that we did was really kind of the basics of the tileable materials you want to apply on a car. We're actually working on more interesting concepts, and typically something that's been requested by pretty much everybody we talk to in the automotive industry is how to deal with seams and stitches. And today, it's something that often is actually modeled in the meshes, and it's terrible to author, it's terrible to modify and iterate on, and it's terrible to render because it's tons and tons of geometry. And there is no reason really to put that in the geometry, and that should live in the texture. And so we're working on future version of our tools that allow you to actually draw and paint those stitches. And we'll actually probably beginning of next year, we'll have a very big amount of content that we'll put on Substance Source and probably inside of Substance Painter by default. There will be dozens and dozens of types of stitches that are, again, procedural, tweakable, that you'll be able to paint inside of Substance Painter. That's pretty much it for me. I think I'm out of time. So thank you guys for coming and listening to me. If you have more questions, you can either come talk to me after the talk, or you can send me an email at jeremie.noguer@allegorithmic.com. And we'll also have a little booth on the show floor in the AutoTech area if you want to come by to see a demo of either Substance Painter or even Substance Alchemist that I didn't show here, which is a pretty interesting tool. Please feel free. And now we have a little bit of time for questions. So if anybody has questions already, please feel free. I don't know if you have a microphone for questions, though.
Is there support for modifying substances at runtime?
So support for modifying substances at runtime in Unity, yes. You can actually, the scripting API allows you to access the substance parameters in the substance runtime. So you can actually do that at runtime. So if you want to do a car configurator, for example, and you have a leather substance, you can actually expose that to the runtime and have your own custom UI that would allow the user, the player, to customize the material, in real time. Any other question? Sure. Is it what? Sorry. It's the same Substance Painter. We revamped the UI recently, so it may look a little different, and I may not use the default layout, but it's the same Substance Painter. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the ability to scan any type of material? How do you guys prepare to combat intellectual property rights?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the stuff that so the question was, sorry, because we didn't have a mic. The question was, how do we, when we allow to scan materials, how do we deal with intellectual property issues? The materials we scan ourselves. We actually partner with different manufacturers, so we have an agreement with them that we can scan their stuff and distribute it online. For the tool that we provide allows you to scan stuff, and I would say whatever you scan is how you want to deal with things, and we really don't have a say on what you want to scan and how you do it. So that's typically up to each customer, I guess, a user to make sure that they scan only what they're allowed to scan. But we don't provide scanning services, for example. We just give you a tool to scan stuff. We explain to you how to do it. But the stuff that we scan internally, we make sure that we have partners that we agree with on when we can scan or not. Yeah.
Would you say that performance of sunsets for mobile devices is good?
I'm too close to
For
that.
mobile devices using sunsets,
Uh-huh.
good or?
We have a mobile engine. I think it's actually not in the. So we rebuilt the Unity plugin from scratch beginning of this year. I think the support for mobile is still not. It may be still in progress. I'm not entirely sure. But the plugin we had before was working on iOS and Android. You probably still want a pretty high-end device if you want to change substance and runtimes. It really depends on what kind of changes you want to make and what's the resolution of the texture, for example. If it's a very simple change and the resolution when you change that material is pretty low, which it could be if you're working on mobile, then those changes could happen in real time. If you're trying to update a complex material that's in 2048 and on mobile, it may be a little too slow to be interactive.
So when you link an asset from Unity to Substance Painter like you did there, is Unity, what material is Unity? Is it just a standard shader? Or?
Yeah, currently it's just the standard shader. And I don't think it's actually using the HDRP currently process. It only works with just the regular standard shader. But obviously we'll update it as new features come in Unity. And I think the issue that I had here, where Unity was having trouble updating, is because in my project I had an opacity channel set up. And so Unity had switched to a shader with transparency, and it was not finding the map, and it was doing some weird things. So we already can adapt to whatever shader you're using, but we only support like a subset of standard materials in Unity. But the plugin, though, the LiveLink plugin, are all open source. So you could just modify it if you want to support something very specific for your workflow. You can easily go in and modify those plugins. Last question? Yeah.
Can you tell us anything more about Alchemist features?
So yeah, we can actually show you Alchemist on the booth. So Alchemist is a tool that allows you to bring in the same way as Bitmap to material, allows you to bring in an image, create a material out of it. It also allows you to use that scanning workflow I was talking about, where you can bring in multiple images. We'll automatically recognize them as scans, and we'll process them automatically for you. And then there is a bunch of filters you can apply to make things seamless, to make sure that, again, to remove defects and do all these material processing steps to get to a point where the material is really usable in production. And so there's three parts. There is a part that allows you to look at materials. There's a part that allows you to import, scan, and create materials. And there's a part that we call Inspire that allows you to create variations of material, where you can bring any kind of material, and you can also bring a mood board or just reference images, and we can extract colors from these mood boards and these references and modify the material based on these colors. So we're trying to make a tool that really appeals to, I'd say, a less technical audience than Substance Designer, for example, or even Substance Painter, and that are really just intuitive to try things with materials and to go from something very simple to something that's complex and that's editable and tweakable. All right, I think we're already out of time, so thank you guys. Thank you all.